Hey everybody, we are back again. If you're just tuning in, we're here for Skidmore's Giving Day, where we have the opportunity to unlock $200,000 for Skidmore if 750 donors make a gift. Thank you so much for everyone who has participated thus far. I'm so honored to be able to welcome Sheldon Solomon, Professor of Psychology. His studies of the effects of the uniquely human awareness of death have been supported by the National Science Foundation and Ernest Becker Foundation, and were featured in the award-winning documentary film Flight of Death, The Quest for Immortality. He is co-authored of In the Wake of 9/11, The Psychology of Terror, and The Worm at the Core on the Role of Death in Life. Sheldon is a Psychological Society Fellow and a recipient of the American Psychological Association Presidential Citation, a Lifetime Career Award recipient by the International Society for Self and Identity, and the recipient of the Association of Graduate Liberal Study Programs Annual Faculty Award. Sheldon is going to be taking questions. Did I get that right?
No, that's funny.
Okay.
I don't know that guy, but...
Well, we're going with it.
That's good.
Sheldon is going to take questions during our segment, so either send your questions to #SkidForLife or click on the chat feature and send away. So you're here to talk about your research.
Yeah, I am, and thanks and everybody out there. It's good to see you, albeit from a distance, and to be part of today's event. And I'm happy to talk about my work. I came here in 1980, so I've been here longer than a lot of the buildings and the furniture. And at the time, I would say Skidmore, although a fine college, was mainly known for its work in the arts and humanities. And I joined the psychology department, and I got interested in a line of research that didn't really have much to do with what I was trained to do in graduate school. So I came here doing experiments to see if different ways to manage stress without drugs were effective. And then I was wandering around in the library, and I ran into a book that I thought had an interesting title. And it was called The Denial of Death by a cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker. And what Becker said in a nutshell is that what makes people uniquely different from all other creatures is that we're smart enough to know that we're here. And that in turn means that we're also smart enough to know that, like all living things, that we won't be here forever. And what Becker argued, and he won a Pulitzer Prize for this argument, is that we're not all that enthusiastic about the prospect that we will someday die. And in fact, he says that almost everything that we do, whether we're aware of it or not, is designed to minimize death anxiety by giving us a sense that we live in a world that has meaning and one in which we as individuals have value. And I read those books, and that book and others by Ernest Becker, and I was like, wow, I think these are important ideas. But a lot of psychologists at the time just said, well, this is speculative nonsense. There's no evidence that that concerns about death have anything to do with human behavior. And moreover, if you're saying that these concerns are unconscious, well, how could you ever prove that? And so what we started to do, along with my graduate school buddies, Jeff Greenberg and Tom Pazinski, but a lot of the work started at Skidmore, was to develop relatively simple laboratory paradigms to see whether or not these ideas have merit. And mainly, what most of the work does is to just remind people in a variety of ways about the fact that they're going to die someday. Right, so sometimes we just ask people on a little questionnaire, write down your thoughts and feelings about the fact that you're going to die someday. Other times we're a little more subtle. We go outside the lab and we stop people either in front of a funeral parlor or 100 meters to either side. And the logic is that if you're standing right in front of a funeral parlor, well, death might be on your mind, even if you don't think that that's the case. And then in the even more subtle paradigm, we bring people back to the lab and we have them read things on a computer. And while we're doing that, we flash the word either death or field for 28 milliseconds, so fast that you don't even know that you've seen anything. And then in now hundreds of studies, what we've demonstrated is that whenever people are reminded that they will someday die, it influences everything. It influences their attitudes about other people. So, for example, when Christians are reminded of their own mortality, they like fellow Christians a lot more, and they don't like Jewish people. When Israelis are reminded of their mortality, they like Jewish people, but they don't like Christians, and so on and so forth. But these death primes also influence our behavior. So when Germans are reminded that they're going to die someday, they sit closer to people that look like they're German, and they sit further away from people that look like they're Turkish immigrants. And more, unfortunately, how shall I put this? A little bit more disarming is that when we are reminded of our mortality, we become more willing to hate and to kill people, literally to harm people who are different. So when Iranians are reminded of their mortality, they become more supportive of suicide bombing. And when Americans are reminded of their mortality, they become more supportive of using nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons against countries that presently don't threaten us. And so, in a nutshell, we think that we now have more than 30 years of evidence that's suggesting that fundamentally unconscious concerns about our own mortality literally affect everything, from who you voted for in the last election, to what you ate for lunch, to the kinds of relationships that you have with your fellow human beings. Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see that we've actually won some awards for this work. And of course, I'm very proud of that. But I think it's important to note that all of the attention that our work has received would never have happened in the absence of the support that I received from the college when I first got here. No one would publish our work for the first few years. No one would give us money like the National Science Foundation to support this research until we had proven that these paradigms were successful. And so I was the lucky beneficiary of 5 or 6 years of faculty development funds, without which none of this could have happened. And I think this is very important, because a lot of people think, oh, you have to be at Harvard, or you have to be at Stanford or Oxford to have big ideas in science. And I think that in at least a small way, what we've accomplished suggests that there's another route to big ideas, and that's to be in institutions like Skidmore that value interdisciplinary inquiry and that have the patience to allow this kind of work to develop over time. I surely would have been fired in almost any university setting.
You mentioned you've been here since 1980. What are some of the classes that you've taught that you've enjoyed the most?
Oh, wow. All right. So this is another great thing about Skidmore, and it is that we are, I think, a very unique institution. At most colleges and universities that I am familiar with, someone in a psychology department would teach 3 or 4 courses, maybe 5 or 6, depending upon what you're trained in. So I'm an experimental social psychologist by trade. And when I got here, well, I taught social psychology, I taught personality theory. And then I was like, wow, I'd like to teach some other things that I don't yet know much about. And you would never see that in a major university. And yet, the psychology department, the Dean Weller at the time, Eric Weller, he said, wow, I think that's great. And so I started teaching evolutionary psychology. I started teaching existential psychology. I started teaching seminars about consciousness and the origin of art and symbols. I think I've had the good fortune to teach more than 30 different courses. And you know, it sounds like a slogan sometimes, but we say at Skidmore that creative thought matters. Well, it actually does. And I'm happy to say that at our best, the college puts its proverbial money where its mouth is, in the sense that they encourage all of us on the faculty to, you know, on the one hand, we're expected to maintain expertise in the area that we're responsible for covering in the context of our departments, but we're also given, you know, relatively free range in terms of diversifying those interests and forging connections with other folks throughout the college.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot.
That's great. You talk a lot about how faculty are impacted by, you know, support of the college and really philanthropic support of our alumni, parents, and friends. And you're a beloved professor. Can you talk about the ways that students benefit from the generosity of donors?
Well, absolutely. You know, first of all, thanks to all of the folks that have provided support for the college over the years. It took me a few years to realize that all institutions like Skidmore, it doesn't matter that our tuition is high. You know, one of my colleagues jokes that it's the equivalent of driving a Lexus off a cliff each year, and I think that's a good way to put it. But the fact is that that still doesn't cover the actual cost of educating a Skidmore student. And what the support that our alumni and their families and other folks provide for the college, what it makes possible is for us to be a first-rate institution with regard to the college's infrastructure and with regard to allowing the faculty to develop as scholars and to engage directly with the students. So back to your question, well, how does this impact on the students? Well, it makes us better professors and it makes us better researchers. I like how Alfred, I think his name, Whitehead, the philosopher, said, knowledge doesn't keep any better than fish. And so when you have professors in all of our departments doing cutting edge research, the students benefit. And so I've been here forever, and I think I have 8 or 9 former students that are now themselves professors. And in fact, I go and study with them every year. They're like, come on, old man, you know, bring your walker, bring your cell phone, we'll show you how to use it.
Yeah.
And so for me, the direct effect on the students is the quality of the education that they get, combined with the really intimate contact that we have with our students by virtue of graduate institution. We spend a lot of time with the students from the minute that they get here. They become part of our not only intellectual community, they become part of our families. My 2 children, their godparents are Skidmore students, and I own part of a small business downtown Esperanto on Caroline Street. Go there when you're next here with a former student. And I think that this is important, that there is kind of a seamless integration between the academic and the psychosocial part of being a Skidmore student. And it may sound like a cliche, but when somebody comes to Skidmore, it's not just for 4 years. You become part of an extended family that really transcends the confines of time and space. And I like that.
Yeah. Wonderful. We've got some questions from our viewers. Okay, so when you read things by people such as Anita Morjani or Jill Bottle Taylor or others who have recounted NDEs, what is your reaction?
Oh, okay, good question. So NDEs, for the folks out there unfamiliar with that, are near-death experiences. And my reaction is that we need to take those experiences quite seriously and without prejudging what underlies them. And so to frame that more simply, a lot of people who have had near-death experiences claim that they were dead and they have now come back to life, and that gives them a privileged view of a way of looking at the world that is psychologically profound and potentially significant, both personally and socially. Some people who have studied near-death experiences say, well, this proves that you don't really ever die, that there is something, call it a soul or an afterlife or anything that you'd like, that persists after we no longer physically exist. I'm agnostic on that point. As a scientist, there's no evidence to date to suggest that near-death experiences are indicative of any kind of literal immortality, but it would be ill-advised to rule out anything unequivocally. The history of science is littered with ideas that we used to believe couldn't possibly be true that we now know are otherwise. Our research is we work now with people who have had near-death experiences. I work with a very talented Italian graduate student, Simone Bianco, at the University of Padua, and he spent last spring here at Skidmore with me. And we're looking at people who have had near-death experiences and trying to measure what happens to them psychologically as a result of those experiences. And I know I'm being very long-winded because I want to make it very clear that I take those experiences very seriously. I think everybody who has had an experience is profoundly altered by them. And at the risk of sounding cavalier, from my perspective as an egghead researcher, it doesn't matter so much to me about the implications of these experiences for the existence of an afterlife, so much as what matters is to take a really close look at what happens to folks after those experiences, most of which is incredibly positive, and to see how we can proverbially bottle that and spread it around to people who have not had them.
Wow. We're still taking questions and we've got a few more minutes, so please make sure you send them in. We've got another viewer question. Do you feel like the current divisive rhetoric is new or amplified by the 24/7 nature of the media?
Okay, great question. It is new and it is amplified. And that I'm trying to have it both ways here, of course. Divisive rhetoric in terms of political discourse, as far as we know, has been around since democracy. So evidently there's ancient Roman inscriptions about, so-and-so has molested goats. And so, campaigns in a democracy based on incendiary rhetoric that tends to polarize people, that's certainly not new to democracy. And this is not the first election that has been, just a giant cesspool of unfortunate rhetoric, I would argue. What is new, however, and this is where I think the amplified part of the inquiry is quite right, is the 24/7 nature of the media. But it's more than that. It's that it's not only that there's things going on 24/7, but that the way that people get information these days is just fundamentally different. Until recently, most Americans saw the same information funneled through a relatively few and this may be a controversial statement, but what I would say is that within reason, the news was relatively objective, that there were people disagree all the time, but there was such a thing as a fact and such a thing as truth. Well, now more people get information from Facebook and from Twitter than they do from traditional news sources. And that has had an incredibly polarizing and divisive effect, because most Americans no longer live near anybody who doesn't already share their political beliefs. Most Americans don't accept from sources that they already agree with. And again, at the risk of sounding somewhat partisan, without apology, we are now in, I think, a very dangerous moment where our people, and I say that including all of us, are losing the critical capacity to differentiate between a truthful and non-truthful statement. And that does not bode well for democracy. I'll shut up and leave it at that, but I think that's a great question. Yeah.
Well, so fascinating. Do we have any other questions for Sheldon? No, I think that's it. Well, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
It was so great to have you. And stay tuned for more from Skidmore's Giving Day.
Very good. You here all day?